80% of women will be in charge of the finances in their lifetime. And a lot of statistics look at a female investor and they just really simplify it and say, well, she's more conservative. There's an undertone to it that no, we want to understand everything so we can make decisions, take the risks we're comfortable with taking. In Canada, money's a taboo topic. Okay, we don't share. And if we do, people are sharing a subsection of really the whole equation. Tsunami is ultimately the amount of wealth, let alone the percentage that will be in control in the hands of women, and an industry that really hasn't seen women as their target audience.
This is really for any woman who is on a mission to not just make money, but actually generate wealth. All right, today we are going to have a conversation about money that most people won't touch or get into. My guest today is going to talk to us about something that she has coined the second Me Too movement. And this is really for any woman who is on a mission to not just make money, but actually generate wealth. My guest, Catherine Dorazio, has spent 25 years inside of the financial industry. She's managed $16 billion in client assets. She was the youngest and first female partner at Canada's largest private money manager. And now she's on a mission to change how women entrepreneurs and just women in general think about and manage their wealth. So, all of the women that are listening to this show, most of them are business owners, are entrepreneurs, Catherine. So I want to just set that as context as we get into the conversation and welcome you to the show.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Yeah, this conversation I'm so looking forward to. Selfishly, I can't wait to hear what you have to say from obviously what it's going to provide the audience and the guests, but I'm also really interested in this being someone who has a, desire to not just make money, but actually create a level of wealth that goes beyond, my lifetime and into what that can create for the ripple effect for other people. So, in today's conversation, I guess I'd like to start with this second Me Too movement that you've coined, because I think it's, obviously provocative, and you probably did that for a reason and talked about it for that reason. But let's talk about what that's all about.
Well, I think, just that excitement to normalize this, 80% of women will be in charge of the finances in their lifetime. So if you just kind of go, oh, am I talking to this person? I'm talking to women, as you said, broadly. That might be investors, that might be entrepreneurs, it might be philanthropists, but ultimately, all of us as women, the way, the world actually is going to play out with longevity is this is going to be us. And so Me Too was really actually, an earlier part of my own journey when I was making a pivot and I started to share my experience with other women in my network, other professionals. And I kept hearing Me Too. So it wasn't actually a marketing coin phrase. It was literally what we were saying. And back to that normalization, this was quite a large cohort of people and women who were starting to feel some of the same things. So, one larger, broader aspect to that was, look, my friend has coined it after a book, The Second Mountain, where we spend our first mountain of our career, going to school, getting all the accolades that are required to make the sacrifices, to get the job, to climb the ladder, to do the things, to have, the family and kids and the backflips start to come and we pile it all on.
Yeah.
And in the second mountain, which I'll tie it back to money, but you start to be driven by other things that your experience in your life inform you, which is kind of like, what's your superpower? What's your purpose? How am I going to make an impact in the world? And the Me Too is when women start to, realize that they want to live their life with more purpose. They want to create this impact. They don't want to fit into the confines of some of the corporate structures. And something is ejecting them onto that second mountain. And in that, they're saying, Me Too. I want to live this way, defined by things that are so important. And then money's really just a tool, because one thing to add is when you actually live with purpose, the money comes. When you look for the money, often, right? Because
Totally.
it fit to something. So there's so much in there. But Me Too, it's really us all on the same journey, starting to live with our aspirations at the forefront.
I love that. And this idea of the purpose being at the forefront of it and wanting to not just make money, but make money in a way that feels really good and leaves that impact. 'Cause I know, like most of the women that I work with, that's exactly it, is they could be making more, maybe more in other jobs or professions, and they decide to go the route of, like, doing their own thing, taking a risk on themselves, going all in on something that feels deeply meaningful, and to your point is, like, the money comes then, after, later, but immediately it might not be such an obvious, it's not for the money, is what a lot of people aren't doing it for, that as the primary driver, even though it is important. So I want to dig a little bit deeper though underneath the, that whole idea of the Me Too piece. And so when you said, it was something that you were hearing in, the people that you were talking about, what was kind of the underlying narratives underneath that were driving the, like, hey, me too?
I think, there's twofold. One is this, what is my career? What's it going to look like? As we live longer, retirement's not in our 50s anymore.
Yeah.
And therefore, we start to get a level of credibility, success, reputation, experience that we can do it more masterfully as, what we ultimately want to give into this world versus looking for the job, doing the thing on someone else's terms. And so
Mm,
you talked about people might take a really big, scary jump into something they're passionate about, and more women are making that jump.
mhm.
And again, we normalize that this is, yes, it's scary. Yes, it's easier to fit in someone else's box, but you will be more successful. One measure of that might be money because you're actually encouraged and inspired that you can do this.
Mhm.
So I work in a very traditional male-dominated industry, and it's not a comfortable place for women,
Mhm.
when they make that money and they are looking for what to do with it, they just don't bounce down the street to say, okay, I'm going to go and look at how this works. So Me Too is, again, it's a normalization first of career, of how we think about what we want to be doing on whose terms and with what skill set and how that work environment works for us, as
Mhm.
mother and all the other pieces of society, often than not puts more so on our plates. And then for money, making it sure that Me Too, yeah, you know what? I want it to work hard for me as well.
Yeah.
I want to steward it wisely. I want to feel this responsibility not as daunting, but encouraging and empowering and
Mhm.
aspirational so that I don't underserve my own ability.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that those two pieces that can go hand in hand is what I really like about what you're saying, because, and we can get into this a little bit, but traditionally the story's been is like, if you want to really make money, then you can't do the values driven, impact driven things. Like I remember talking to someone years ago around investments and investing in, more, what were they called? Like I can't remember, but it's like a values driven kind of fund kind of
Be
idea.
responsible or
Yeah, yeah.
in the
And then
culture.
being like, and really like steering me away from that to be like, if you want to do good in the world, go do that somewhere else. But if you want to make money, like invest in the whatever the top performing stocks or whatever were. And so I'd love to get into that with you a little bit, because I know you speak to that, is that the financial systems and a lot of the advice out there aren't set up for women. They're set up for men. And you actually shared a stat somewhere around the number of women that leave their financial advisor after their partner passes. And it was really high. I can't remember the number, so maybe you can speak to that. But like, can we get into that a little bit about what you see as the gaps there and why?
Yeah, well, there's so much there. So first off, when you're stewarding someone's wealth, that is a relationship that is helping you with one of the most important assets in your life, right? And so if there's not a strong connection by communication, understanding inherently what that investor, let alone that family, wants, it probably isn't leaving them in an empowered position to then go use and make decisions on it on a daily basis. Like I say, I don't go with you to the grocery store, right? So you need to be able to have information that you can understand and integrate into your daily life. Okay. So we start there. So if stereotypically that family unit hasn't been advised together, one, there's a breakdown between the two of them, and there's definitely a breakdown between, the advisor's role with one spouse or the other.
Mhm.
Okay. And then if you kind of peel it back and say, well, women intuitively understand each other. right? We communicate about things in a way that, the same way, men might understand more of the data or the performance. So our industry really has been brought up on a lot of concrete information, right?
Mhm.
So whether that's performance numbers, whether that's, the ways communications are put together, reports are delivered, and a lot of statistics look at a female investor and they just really simplify it and say, well, she's more conservative, she likes long-term planning, and, she wants to do good in the world. And so she's more oriented. And well, the nuances of some of that might be true. There's an undertone to it that no, we actually we want to understand everything so we can make decisions, take the risks we're comfortable with taking. And maybe we've had to go into a different way of interpreting that looks conservative because we really just weren't spoken to in our language in a way that someone intuitively understood or could guide us to how to make those decisions well.
Right.
So there's a little bit of a generalization, but
Mhm.
it comes from, who the target audience originally was. And that just is the way our society was brought up. But as women come to the forefront and are coming more so to the forefront in what I call the pink tsunami, that
Mhm.
80% is huge because women, by the way of outliving, their spouse as baby boomers, as we see those first baby boomers turning 80, the percentage of divorce, the percentage of women coming out of post-secondary universities, et cetera, and going into careers and adding to the family wealth, or on their own. And so when
Mhm.
you add those pools up, you get an enormous influx of wealth that hasn't traditionally been in the hands of women. And then that counts now into the trillions.
Mm.
So tsunami is ultimately the amount of wealth, let alone the percentage that will be in control, which we talked about being at 80%,
Yeah.
in trillions of dollars in the hands of women, and an industry that really hasn't seen women as their target audience. And while it's trying to pivot, it's missing the authenticity of just who we are as humans and interpreting that a little bit too generalized in a way that
Mhm.
I think, really gets to the heart of what women want.
Yeah.
And so you also brought up types of investments. And look, I don't think it really matters at the end of the day what someone wants to do with their wealth. Do they want to invest in their own business? Do they want to ultimately work and use the stock market or something else? Like that's for each individual to navigate with advisor, but just to know that I want them to lean in
Mhm.
and educate themselves on their options, and it shouldn't be that scary. So
Yeah.
hope encourages them to do that.
Totally. Well, let's get into the pink tsunami a little bit more because, this is a fun visual and idea and all of that. And for, the audience is likely going to be listening to this podcast. Most of them are generating their own wealth and in some ways they're the first people in their families, in their lineage to create the kind of wealth that they're creating. And there's obviously a difference between making money and then generating wealth. And so maybe we can talk a little bit about where you see the gap right now when we're talking about this pink tsunami, not just on the financial system side, but on the education side, the awareness side of the women who are part of this pink tsunami.
Right. Well, let me just clarify that the pink tsunami has actually already been evidenced by the silver tsunami, which came before it.
Mm.
So the silver tsunami was the baby boomers, and as they retired, they've worked their entire lives, they've accumulated wealth, and what did they do? They started to direct it to things of their interests. Cruise ships, golf, all these industries started to come into the forefront because people direct money to their interests and what matters to them.
Mhm.
So when you see the statistic of how much wealth, and I just explain where it might all come from and the reason for the transition, and that comes into the hands of women, well, the first thing they're going to do is to direct it to what matters. So the first thing, speaking to any entrepreneur of any gender, of any business, know your audience might be shifting.
Mhm.
Okay. Because when you have money, you have controls of decision, you're going to direct it to what matters and what women want, let's just generalize, might be a little bit different. And there's a new audience with a lot of buying power out there. Okay.
Yeah.
So, for entrepreneurs in any industry, I think, taking that step to really understand what that shift may mean for them.
Mhm.
Now, as far as being an entrepreneur, you're right. There aren't as many mentors in maybe our family systems that demonstrated what we can or could be doing as someone who had, the abilities, mind, money, and soul to, get up every day and work really hard at something, we loved or we wanted to do and kind of make something of ourselves in a entrepreneurial venture. And so look, there's lots of organizations starting to pop up. There's lots of women's networks, women's for various industries, passions, there actually is quite a bit out there to surround yourself with women. So one thing I love in Worth, which is a community I created,
Yeah.
is minded women, women who have the same value that their aspirations are big and bold, and they are empowered by knowing each other and normalizing how hard that can be
Hmm.
um, together. And so I would say just find your community,
Yeah.
find the people that are going to teach in a way that's just either sharing their own experience or, going into something that's letting women, really come to the forefront of what's happening here because they're
Hmm.
out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. And let's talk about Worth a little bit because this is this beautiful community that you have been building for a few years now, right? How long has Worth been around?
Oh, well, if you actually go to my business coach, you'd be saying Worth has been in me all this time because
Yeah.
really it's been an organic journey of who I am as a person. And if you think about, me making this pivot, me talking to my friends and my professional community and sharing kind of where I was thinking, what I wanted to do and coining the Me Too, because literally that's what they said to me.
Mhm.
The next step was I started to bring them all together and just be like, thank you. You've shared some wisdom. You've helped motivate me. You've helped me see my potential. We can be really hard on ourselves.
Yeah.
And so that Me Too group started to actually kind of be a community for me
Mm.
and say we're stronger together. And so, women coming together started to demonstrate to me the power it was for me. And I'm lucky to have it. What if every woman who was in this position that now the pink tsunami was hitting had it too?
Right.
And as I brought them literally into my kitchen over a mimosa to say thank you, now it wasn't me too. It was like, can we do that again?
Mhm.
Because it was interesting to me that they didn't all have this community.
Right.
And so, Worth started by organically just doing what I needed to support myself through something that was transitional and with impact and purpose at its core, and building it so that others could benefit from it. And my Worth is as a community that empowers and inspires each other to live to their potential, they'll take that for whatever that means for them.
Hmm.
And to the point that they come into an intersection and need, whether it's professional advice or, someone there'll be a community that just ultimately normalizes their journey. I felt like I was on an island,
Hmm.
this only person in the world this has ever happened for. And this is really hard. And this Me Too came out. I'm like, what do you mean? Get off the island. This is my story.
Yeah.
And, we're all living quite similar experiences out there, as
Hmm.
women, as entrepreneurs, as business people, as mothers, like we're feeling the same things. And what women do really well is, they share a little more openly, a little more vulnerably. And that, if we do it in the right way, can really lift us all up higher.
Yeah. So if we were like, a fly on the wall in some of these conversations that you're having inside of Worth and with women around money and wealth, what are some of the common topics that do come up where you say, yeah, we have a lot of shared experiences? Like, what are some of the conversations that you're having with women these days around this topic?
I think the first one is this dire need that they want to do something.
Hmm.
They want to step into something scary. You referenced it earlier, like it's a little bit scary to go out on your own or pursue a passion or let go of the lifeline of something, that's become very comfortable, whether that's, a job or a marriage or, something that's been in their life. So like just kind of a little bit more of, yeah, I can do that too.
Yeah.
I always say all women need is to know I can,
Hmm.
and then they will.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the first. If I get a little bit more specific of some ones that come to mind, there was a woman, she's going through a divorce and, I originally might have thought of that as, look, we're going to get a settlement and that's going to allow me to continue to live this life and have an income. But then she started to look at some of the, business assets and go, maybe I actually just want to run these. Maybe
Mhm.
I would do that. So it was just creating a little bit of perspective of options
Right.
versus one that, was call it safe or normal or everyone had done before. I think the other one is just women definitely want to explore the world of investing.
Mhm.
You know, it's it's one of those where we sometimes approach it that it's financial literacy. And these are busy women, they juggle all the things of life. I've amassed this over 25 years. It's hard to think a night seminar or a, podcast every once in a while is going to fulfill
Mhm.
the importance of that role. So coming alongside someone that can actually steward the decisions, explain the trade-offs very clearly. And with that, it's a level of understanding without needing to know the nuts and bolts of everything that goes on because it's really quite complex. So
Yeah.
I was like, pair yourself with a good driver that knows where they're going, that points out along the way so you can decide, what you want to do. So investing without too much on the call it hard literacy piece
Yeah.
and more so options, trade-offs. How is it done well?
Uh-huh.
All right.
Yeah.
And where can that play a role? The last I would say is just really showing some of the entrepreneurial journey. You
Mhm.
know, think about a lot of women as they come into the second mountain and they're really kind of approaching this like, okay, putting it all together, like it's their moment to shine and bring all the experience to bear. And so, yeah, they're sharing a little bit of how hard that is
Mhm.
and being creative together and sharing experiences so, they can make incredible opportunities out of it.
Yeah. Oh, it's such powerful conversations and so universal in terms of, I think, what a lot of women are going through.
Well, it's universal. We're all thinking these things. I encourage people to get a little more vulnerable and share. And I it really doesn't matter what the topic is. The underlying tone is more so I want to do it a little bit, my way this time.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay. So where I kind of want to go with this next is just having a conversation around money in general. Now, my experience is there's kind of like two camps of people. One camp is like really like open to talking about it, learning about it, like, it's this thing that draws them in. And then there's the other camp of people that reject it. There's stories about it, not it as in money, around like the conversation around money and not wanting to touch it. What's your experience with that, really, with money being at the core of everything that you talk about? Let's have a dialogue around that.
Well, I know when you get so comfortable with it in your in an entire career, I can ask such direct questions and, people are like, "Oh my goodness, she like really asked me that."
Yeah.
But it's because, and I do say this quite a bit, in Canada, money is a taboo topic. Okay.
Hmm.
We don't share. And if we do, people are sharing a subsection of really the whole equation. And that makes it really hard because if people aren't sharing the entire, thought process, what they do, where it's worked, where it hasn't, you're not able to use that actually as an education tool. It's like going to Vegas, just the sliver and think
Right.
everyone just wins, right? So that's not the case. And therefore it's a common experience that people don't have a lot of other perspective. The next piece of that is like, what did you grow up with? People that grew up and more so than not, that it wasn't talked about. It wasn't talked about even in the family unit. And sometimes I say, like, I am such a privileged position because I often know, more than anyone, even sometimes the spouse and less so than the accountant. Like, there's our rankings,
Yeah.
right? So we don't share this openly. Let's start there. Um, for those that have a way of sharing, I guess first question is, are they sharing everything?
Hmm.
Like, so be careful what you're listening to or what advice you're getting from someone who's not ultimately a professional that's learning everything.
Hmm.
And then the other piece is, if they're sharing, great, maybe you've got yourself a trusted group of friends that are kind of starting to build on, sharing how all of this works in their life because it's a value system.
Hmm.
I think there's things that I probably spend more money on than other people, and there's things I'm very frugal on that other people are happy to spend on. And that's an individual decision, which is why this isn't a textbook equation.
Right.
If I have to sit down with someone, I really have to understand the motives and the value systems. But what I hope to bring is at every point in the dialogue of making a decision, I'd be able to give some perspective because oftentimes they're going to be very confident they want to do X. And here's why.
Mhm.
Didn't realize there wasn't anything other than X because the only things they've ever seen was what they saw in their family and the few friends that maybe shared something similar. So if I
Yeah.
give them, X as well as A, B, C, and D, it becomes a conversation
Opens up
of,
perspective.
oh,
Yeah.
maybe I could do something different here. And then they
Mm.
make a, decision right for them in today's world.
Yeah. Yeah. So it is. It's like just having that, like that perspective opened. And I see that so much like, oh my gosh, that's possible. I could do that. Like I can actually claim like that as what I desire in terms of my wealth and my income and all of that. And sometimes it just takes someone not only modeling it, because to your point is like sometimes you don't get to see what the inner workings of that are, but educating you on that. And what to you is what's the biggest downside or risk for women who choose to avoid this conversation?
You know what? Get back to money being a tool,
Mhm.
right? You're likely, building something without a tool being used to the best of its ability to help you. Investing isn't something, it should be understood, but not completely avoided
Mhm.
unless there's reason to say that it's not necessary. So, investing comes with the intersection of knowing who you are, where you want to go. I answer two questions. What's the money for and how you get from A to B?
Mhm.
And can you afford that or not? Really, right? So, if you avoid this conversation, you're just taking a tool out of your tool belt,
Mhm.
but also recognizing there's a couple layers here. There's the actual hard investment, okay, what you actually are putting your money into. There is no one human being that knows all of it,
Mhm.
right? So you have to really adjudicate how you're accessing that and then what are the characteristics of that investment, the risk return, all of the details and parameters around it. Building on top of that, then there's a strategy, what eggs are in which basket and why are they there? And that can be a very calculated, should be a very calculated approach to, if you think and analogize it to building a house, you need certain things in there to get from A to B, right? So well, you need four walls for the things to go up.
Yeah.
So making sure that the investments are held together by a strategy that's professionally managed would be always my opinion
Mhm.
because there are professionals for a reason that put
Yeah.
a lot of effort into being able to do this well. From there, then that's the intersection with values in someone's life. You know, a- that is an important piece because, as I said, there's not just one equation. So
Mm.
having something that can really pull out that whether you got a certain return or not of any number isn't really the driver of success. Did it fulfill your life in the way you wanted it to,
Mhm.
uh, comfortably, responsibly, right?
Yeah.
Because and it's very complex topic, but ultimately there's all of these layers that come together, and we spend a lot of time focused on the investment of what we put our money into. And I always, I see all kinds of different investment situations. I have a term, it's called a bucket of stocks. If you
Mhm.
go buy, a bunch of top performing stocks, that's all you got.
Mhm.
You know, don't have any thought of how they work together or how they, are going to respond in a certain environment or how they align to your goals or they're a bucket of stocks. You bought a bunch of things, right?
Mhm.
And what they do is really individual to that certain investment, but strategically done well can tie it all the way to that end goal.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think that's such an important thing to remember is like, what is your money being a tool for? And then I love that is like, is it serving the purpose that you intended it to serve? And we just recently bought a home on the Sunshine Coast. And I was in my investments the other day and I used those to buy the house, some of it to buy the house. And at first, I was kind of gonna be like, "Well, that's a lower number now, and it's gonna kind of, like, make me a little bit anxious," but I quickly, like, was like, "No, that" 'cause it was like, "What was the purpose of this?" Is like, to buy a home. Is like, actually, that served its purpose, and, there's other things, obviously, that our money can serve purposes for, but it is really, I think, great to think about that, especially for those who are maybe not as comfortable in the conversation around money is like, it's not just about the hard numbers. It's what is that money doing for you personally, but also if you have, things that you want to do with it in the world to create impact and that kind of thing. So, one of the things that I think might be a good conversation to leave off on is for the women that are listening right now and, she's thinking about, is her money working for her? Is she, is it just sitting there in these random bucket of stocks as you talk about, or a savings account? What would you want to say to that person who, might have this money, but they're not really sure around, like, is it actually working for her?
Yeah. It starts with that, like, you can do this. Okay. I'm not incredibly smart. Yes, I've been fortunate to be in this industry, but we can explore something together so you can understand it comfortably. So you can, like, let's start with the first step. From there, you're really looking at money in the same way you look at, your time, your other assets. You want to work hard and have a return on that for yourself and to get you where you want to go.
Mhm.
And so if you can do this and you want to educate yourself a little more, lean in and find someone to start to have the conversation. And then, ask the questions like, this is your money. It is not something to be, just trusted away or taken lightly. Really sit down and reflect. And we could go into the wonderful world of AI now, the types
Mhm.
of questions to ask. And it's not always about performance and fees, but it's also about someone getting to understand you and connect with you and really see if they can align those things well. Because I think that's the thing it breaks down for all people more often than not. If
Mhm.
they end up a bucket of stocks versus something that's enabling a vision and an aspiration and wealth and the words that means. I just I want women to know that, this industry isn't as scary as it seems.
Mhm.
That they've afforded all that hard work into schooling and jobs and entrepreneurial ventures. And this is just one more step into an
Mhm.
arena, is welcoming and something that they can learn over time.
Mhm.
So be curious, get in there, learn, share, be vulnerable of what you really want and what you don't know, and you'll get a good return in the right way.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. There's something so powerful about just being engaged in the process and really understanding it and having, to your point, someone you don't have to do it alone. You find someone that you can trust and aligns with you in terms of how your values and what your goals are. And it can be a really powerful process. Before we wrap, let's talk about worth a little bit. So, because now we're at the point where, people are like, okay, I might be interested. Like, that sounds good. You have this incredible community of women that you've brought together. Tell us a little bit about that. And if people are interested, how they might learn more about that community.
Sure. So, worth, as I mentioned, was an organic experience of my own life and a community that came around me at a point in time of pivot that I hope to curate for, more women, not only in my growing circle of people that, it's like a little bit of a spider's web. It just keeps growing. And so Worth by Catherine was created on Instagram as well as, just following away on LinkedIn. And I try to do that, empower and inspire women to lean in to the conversation. And with that, whether they're just taking that home to their family, I do often say that, look, we divide and conquer. It's very natural. I don't hold my husband's hand and take out the garbage. And therefore, there's certain skill sets in a family unit, but don't avoid it completely.
Mhm.
Okay. Get involved, ask the questions, start to, understand. And I call it life design. You would do that if you were designing a house together. Well, you're designing your asset house together. So
Mhm.
get in the conversation. And then, as I said, this room, many of you can be invited into it. It's taking off into, having a platform of its own on social media. But I do invite people into the room and have people, join us and have that
Mhm.
conversation directly. So they could send me a message if that's of interest. But ultimately, there's a rare voice, I think, in the industry to make it feel approachable, to inspire women that they can do this, to take wealth into their own hands as far as whatever they want to do in life.
Mhm.
And leads them to actually investing or money conversations, just knowing that they're not alone and they, can navigate that as they do other, challenging things in their life, and just a little bit more and be curious.
Yeah. Amazing. We will link your social media accounts in the notes below the episode so people can just find you super easily and join the second Me Too movement as you are talking about it and growing that. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. Thank you to all of you who listened to the show. We hope you enjoyed. If you enjoyed this episode, as usual, please follow and subscribe. It does wonders for the show, and we'll see you in the next episode.